minute or so.
That's all good.
So we can just like gather around the table and
Yeah.
present to you. You can just kick back. Yeah. Okay.
I keep this would be too bad.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah, but overall it's you know, it's lunch now.
Yeah.
And it's not the best timing to start at 30.
I know.
Yeah.
People were still sitting down.
Yeah. And then eventually they flock in.
Yeah.
And there's only one option for lunch too, so everybody has to get in there. So everybody's late.
But I'm perfectly happy to get the privatissimo from our speakers, my speakers.
Presentation.
I think we can.
It would be an ego booster for
We can
doing
do like
it.
probably more like round table or something more like, no?
Yeah.
Or maybe we'll just have you give all the presentations and we'll watch you.
Exactly.
Exactly, we'll be
Yeah.
public.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the audience? You.
Any volunteers?
So let's divide the room in two. Break into working groups.
But how are we doing this time-wise? Because it's only till 3 or so now.
3:30.
3:30.
Yeah, we cut the agenda because unfortunately a couple of our fellow presenters had to drop out at the last minute. They couldn't come to the agenda. So we're good on time.
Okay.
Good on time, sparse on audience.
Yeah, it's sometimes quite disappointing. You fly around the world and then there are so people who actually listen to it. But this happens in this. It's part of the business. Huh?
It can't be avoided sometimes.
Yeah.
So you're with the German Space Agency now?
No. We it's called International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis.
Okay.
We do, you know, these IPCC scenarios and
right, yeah.
now biodiversity stuff and so forth. Huh?
Where are you based?
In the summer castle of the emperor in south of Vienna.
Sounds very elegant.
It's very elegant. I always say we do imperial science.
Do you do any work with Potsdam?
Yeah. They are our, we have a co-petition relationship.
I see.
So we cooperate quite a lot, but of course we are competitors in the sense who owns the better model, which is healthy, you know.
Yeah. Johann Rockstrom just became our chief scientist at our organization, Conservation International.
Really?
Yeah. So he's still with Potsdam.
He's everywhere.
Yeah, he is. So
I wonder how he can do all of this. Huh?
I think he has a twin that he's on.
Yeah.
But we're delighted. He just started last week with us. So we're delighted to have him.
Yeah, or he has this syndrome of not being able to say no to things, you know.
That might be the case as well. Yeah.
It's okay to not say no as long as you can follow up with delegation. So, okay, we can do that, and you're going to be the one to do it. You know, as long as it comes in and flows to somebody, then it's okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, he's into many things. Huh?
He is. Yeah.
We have because we have a few of these guys in our institute, and it's a little bit like the game of the Greek gods, you know. They always look down on Earth, and then very rarely they really come down.
Right.
And see you.
Exactly. Yeah.
And try to engage a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's all
Champion of conservation superstars.
Exactly.
Are you involved in natural capital accounting in any way at your institute?
Not. We had lots of discussion with the European Environment Agency.
Oh, yeah.
But they never gave Eric, exactly.
Yeah.
But we never got any money, so we didn't do it. But it would have been super easy to do it, because we sit on all of the carbon maps and the dynamic models and all of that.
starting in a few minutes, so don't be shy. Hello. Yeah.
But overall, I think it's very important that you show stocks, the movements of stocks. So politically, it's very important to get this message out that we actually this is about stocks. And once you lose them, then it's hard to build them again.
Thank you for coming. At lunch is pretty interesting because everyone's kind of having their meetings, and so we're going to wait a few minutes.
I'm experienced with Geo, no worries.
I'm sorry?
I'm experienced with Geo, I know when the meeting starts.
Yeah, exactly. You're more experienced than I am. But the Europeans are doing amazing work in this field. The European Environment Agency, the JRC. I think that's
Yeah.
a really great effort.
Yeah.
In fact, we're going to be producing, we'll be presenting the report that Jan Erik helped author on the Copernicus applications on these applications.
Okay.
Let's take a couple more minutes and get started.
Hallo, ich kenne den Steffen Fritz, kenne ich gut.
So, ja.
Und wir haben uns auch schon mal ein paar Tage gesehen. Den Iren. Ja, bei
Okay,
den Leuten
ja,
ist klar,
ja,
kann man sich
ja.
schneller merken. Ja, klar.
Ja.
Ich bin besucht hier heute. Kommen hoffentlich ein paar Leute. Was? Deswegen. Wird schon kommen. Ja, gestern ist so. Oh, fangen wir 10 Minuten, ne? Ich geh mal raus.
No, I have some.
So yeah, a lot of this.
Hi, I'm Daniel. Pleased to meet you.
So what's the anticipated time of starting? Still another 10 minutes.
Another couple of minutes, I would say. Yeah.
We can try to get
Yeah, okay.
coffee. You also want to have some? If we get some?
That would actually be great. Just a
Yeah.
black coffee would be lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One?
Yeah.
You got it?
It's fine.
It's fine. Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
With or without sugar?
No sugar.
No sugar.
Yeah.
There's no coffee. Where do you find your coffee?
Real coffee?
Well, any coffee. Where's he going?
I don't know, but
Only the restaurant at this time.
Exactly.
Unless he has a secret source. He seems to be pretty up on things, so maybe he knows where to go.
or maybe he wanted to go to the Africa side of it. He's like, oh, I guess.
I'd say we'll never see him again, but there's his computer, so he'll be back. Did you get to meet Dawn Wright when she was out there? From Esri? She's on your science advisory board.
No, I didn't get to meet her then. I got to meet her very briefly at SCGIS a
think that's better. Yeah, you can see the screen much better.
Thank you. So no coffee, so I brought you some water.
Oh, that's
That was
fabulous.
the only
That's the thing you should choose.
Yeah, they're in madness mode before, and then when it's over, they're in checkout mode.
Yeah, they're just, yeah, completely.
They just want to go somewhere else.
So it's still a little bit of a challenge, but for the participants, it's nice because a lot of them get out of the UC and then
Yeah.
carpool up.
For me, because I travel so much, I just don't, and I'm always going to the UC, and it's like, I don't want to stay out here any longer. I gotta get home.
Yeah, 2 weeks is like a serious pretty big chunk of time, you know. But yeah, for me, I don't think myself and my colleague Kelly, she always lived in UC, and I think SEGIS, because that's where she's kind of a divide
Yeah.
and conquer, so one else is in.
And how's the Sillamore these days? Because last time I was there, I've been there maybe 3 or 4 times for things. There was like no Wi-Fi. Last time I was there, there was one place you could go and get it.
It's
near
getting
the
a
desk.
little better, but I remember my first training there like 4 years ago. I got into the room
Yeah.
and I had this, and I thought,
Yeah,
like,
nothing
oh, like
to
God,
do.
what's up? And then I just noticed that it was like facing the roof. It's just nothing.
Yeah.
You know, like luckily I checked the day before, so I think frantically like in the lobby, and it's a big
Yeah.
lodge,
Yeah.
frantically downloading imagery and like furniture on Earth Explorer.
Yeah.
And then you use open source tools for basic classification and like.
Pretty important for you to have the internet.
Yeah, and then I was like, I couldn't load Earth Explorer, like much less search for images. So I was like, yeah. And I kind of played it off the next week. Okay, it's not like screenshots. What you would do if the images are in the stick, that didn't waste any time. Of course. But, yeah, it's still a bit of a challenge.
So the exhibition opens tomorrow, right? Or is it open already? I'm not sure.
The exhibition, I think it's open already.
It's open already?
Yeah, I got a little notification. Shall we
We'll get started.
get started?
I checked the other rooms, no one's in the other rooms either. Even the main room, there's like 4 people.
Yeah, I
Some
think we
people are.
should get started.
Yeah. Really good to do the meat bits anyway, you know? Meetings just game on my drum.
Oh, we're actually filming.
Nice.
Good. Okay, great. Well, thank you, all 3 of you, for coming to our side event on tracking the contribution of nature, advances in Earth observation for ecosystem accounting. I really appreciate you coming, and because we're an intimate crowd, I think we could be slightly more informal for this side event, and you know, I hope it's going to be an illuminating and productive session. Just quickly to run through the agenda, we're going to give a quick background on what is NCA and what is ecosystem accounting, just to set the stage for the rest of the agenda. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the EO4EA, the Earth Observation for Ecosystem Accounting Initiative. And then we'll talk a little bit about the European Union's recently released report on looking at Earth observation data and its possibilities for applying them for ecosystem services and for natural capital accounting. Then we have our case studies, beginning with ecosystem accounting in Mexico. We're going to do a session on Liberia. And finally, we're going to talk about a new map for global islands for island ecosystem extent accounting. So I think I'm just going to get us started. And I'm going to talk very, very briefly about natural capital accounting, what is SEEA, and what is the EO4EA initiative. So before, you know, just to start out, it might be helpful to start with a problem statement. And the problem statement is nature is foundational to the prosperity and security of people and economies worldwide. So forest stabilizes our climate, rivers, lakes, and oceans provide water and support fisheries, but the benefits of nature to people are hidden from decision makers. And that's what we face. And as a result, nature and natural capital that we depend on is being eroded at an alarming rate. So the TEEP study said that the loss of forests costs about between $2 and $5 trillion a year. And that's about the third of the size of the US economy. That's certainly an underestimate. And the World Bank estimates that natural capital is calculated to be about 36%, about 40% of the total wealth in low-income countries. And these are places where people rely on ecosystem services for their livelihoods. And so that's the problem statement. The contention is that the missing piece of the puzzle, well, every country follows a system of national accounts, right? And every business relies on balance sheets, but they largely omit the benefits from nature. And so what we need to do is capture and integrate that contribution of nature into decision making. And this is part of that broken economic compass. Hi, welcome. So some really brief basics, I think, in this small room. We're going over old ground, but some just definitional issues to get out of the way. Mark, hello, a steering committee member. Yeah, good to see you. So natural capital, right? The stock of renewable and non-renewable natural resources that combine to yield benefits to people, or the flow of benefits to people. Ecosystem services, well, those are the benefits to people from ecosystems such as timber, fiber, pollination, so on and so forth. So these combine to provide benefits for people. Forests that mitigate climate change and harbor biodiversity, for example. Rivers and wetlands that provide fresh water for drinking. Mangroves that provide fish and support food security. So what is natural capital accounting? Well, accounting, the definition of accounting, of course, is measurement, processing, communication of financial information. So if you combine those terms together, what we have is accounting, measuring, that process for tracking our natural assets and services provided by them, and importantly, the relationship to the economy. So in natural capital accounting, we're measuring the value of ecosystems and the services they provide, so stocks and flows, and integrating this information into accounting systems that governments already use for decision making. And so the system of national accounts that I mentioned earlier, it's really translating nature into the same language. And by doing so, you're providing a complete view, or a more complete view, of a nation's assets. Just as an aside, there's an economist named Jim Boyd who wrote a really interesting article called Boxcars and Bread Lines. And in it, he sort of made that quip about, at least in the US, about 80 years ago, our nation moved away from crude measures of the economy into a much more sophisticated system of national accounts that most nations follow now. But in the 1930s, if you wanted to get a picture of what the economy was like, you had to count boxcars traveling between Chicago and New York, right? Or the number of unemployed in the streets. And that's how rudimentary our measures of the economy were. So it was much, much more impressionistic than it was a tool that you could use to set macroeconomic policy. And there weren't measures that allowed for diagnosis, prediction, or a cure, right? And he argues that's the same state that we are in right now with natural capital. So why measure the system? Well, here are some of the policy relevant questions that one may ask, and this is just a partial subset. What is the current model of the economy that we have now, and is it sustainable? That question of sustainability, we cannot get to that with our current economic measures, and natural capital accounting is trying to address that. How do you allocate water more efficiently and equitably is another question that you may be able to address with natural capital accounting, and so on and so forth. One thing to note is that when we talk about natural capital accounting, there's sometimes a confusion in terminology, but I think the basic notion is that they all overlap with each other usefully, and there's considerable, I would argue, coordination between those who do sort of ecosystem assessments, wealth accounting in the case of the World Bank WAVES program, natural capital protocol, the private sector effort to try to really look at impacts and dependencies on businesses to natural capital. And so they all overlap. I think they're all binded together, I would argue, by the system of environmental and economic account. I think that is the sort of standard setting that all of these efforts share. And so the system of environmental and economic accounting, well, that's the statistical system developed by the statistics agencies of the world, OECD, the European Commission, so on and so forth, There are two approaches. One is the central framework, and the other one is the ecosystem account. The central framework was put out in 2012. This guy here. And it was, again, designed to be sort of, capture stocks and flows, make a talk to the system of national accounts, but there was a recognition that it was limited. So because of that recognition, the development of the ecosystem account began. The first version was put out in 2012, and they're now working on a new version to be released in 2020. So what is ecosystem accounting? Well, it's that framework to measure the contribution of ecosystems to the economy. It's aligned with the system of national accounts. It includes service flows and assets. It's physical and monetary. And the information comes in the forms of maps and tables. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but here's the basic structure and framework of the ecosystem account. You have here ecosystem extent, basically where are ecosystems between 2 points of time. For this to be an account, you have to have 2 points of time. The condition, what is the quality and health of that ecosystem? And on the physical side, supply and use, right? And then you get into the monetary values here, and then you integrate those into international accounts through supply use tables. That's essentially what it is. But it's important to note that, as you can imagine, this is a spatial phenomenon, and it has to be assessed spatially. And that's where Earth observation and advances in Earth observation are critical and vital to this effort. The basics of the account, here's an example from Limburg province in the Netherlands, where you're looking at land and land use as well as ecosystems. And there is a distinction between looking at land and a distinction between looking at ecosystems, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Here's an example on the services side, the U.S. effort to do ecosystem accounting. And this is a map showing the potential of pollinator habitats on pollinator-dependent crops. And so it basically shows how natural habitat is important for pollinators that are helping us grow food. So in summary, well, the way many look at ecosystem accounting, it really is the holy grail of what we're trying to do in sustainability, to be systematic, to be repeated, and to speak in a common language that could be used, cross-compared, and can help us generate policy in a more systematic level because we're using structured information. But the idea of being able to look at trends and repeatability and cross-comparison is an important notion. And of course, this allows us to better plan, manage, and monitor our natural resources. There's no mistake in the sense that its application to reporting on the Aichi targets, the SDGs, that link is certainly there. And we have a little bit of a font issue here, but really designing for you could design for environmental expenditures, for example. So I'll end with a couple of quotes. This one is from Dasgupta. I really like this one because poverty will only be made history when nature enters economic calculations in the same way we do buildings, machines, roads, and so on and so forth. And this is great because there's a direct tie between generation of this kind of information and its effect on poverty, its effect on livelihoods. And here's another quote, and I won't read all of it. And my standard joke here is, what economist said this, right? And the answer is, it's not really an economist, but in this case, President Ian Khama, the president of Botswana, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And I only mention this because it shows the sort of demand side of things. The fact that this is no longer the domain of geeky, technical experts, but this is really being demanded by developing countries globally. And Max will talk about that in a second. So I'll end there to give Max a chance to talk about the EO4EA Secretariat. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Daniel. My name is Max Wright, and I work for Conservation International within our Moore Center for Science. And today I'll be talking to you guys about the EO4EA initiative, a relatively new GEO initiative. The outline of the presentation I'll be giving, I'll briefly introduce the initiative, then I'll talk through the work streams and the scope of our work. I'll talk a little bit about some of the partners and practitioners that we're working with and other people who are following ecosystem accounting, and then we'll end with the current status and the next steps for the initiative. So as a little background, the purpose of EO4EA is to connect the Earth observation community with the ecosystem accounting community. Each one has a lot to benefit from the other. And so we're drawing from a very diverse group of stakeholders, including the public sector, private sector, academics, and NGOs, to try to tackle this problem from multiple angles. And the initiative really seeks to create a community of practice around the application of Earth observation for the implementation of ecosystem accounts. So we came up with a vision and a mission statement for our initiative. What we envision is a future where Earth observation enables environmental transparency, and the true value of ecosystems is incorporated into conventional economic accounts and decision-making, leading to a radical shift in the appreciation and valuation of natural resources. And to get there, our mission is to document, pioneer, develop, and test the methods and tools that will allow Earth observation technology to enable the widespread adoption of ecosystem accounting. Through partnership, research, practical application, we'll advance the science of Earth observation and the practice of ecosystem accounting in general. So how do we get there? Well, we spent some time thinking about work streams, areas of work that we could focus our efforts to further the cause. And the 4 work streams we have are case studies and synthesis, ecosystem extent and condition accounts, the measuring and monitoring of ecosystem services, and finally, implementation and capacity building. So the first work stream, the case studies and synthesis, seeks to highlight the case studies and the applications of ecosystem accounting that are happening both at national levels and at subnational levels. The synthesis will focus on the contributions of Earth observation and how it's being used at these various case studies. And ultimately, we would like to use this information to inform the development of new methods and applications. Some of the key research questions we'd be looking at are where and at what scale are ecosystem accounting efforts being performed? What is the role of Earth observation within those efforts? And what are some of the gaps or the pieces that Earth observation can further contribute to ecosystem accounting? The second work stream is ecosystem extent and condition. Ecosystem extent accounts provides the foundation for ecosystem accounting, and it's critical for the characterization and spatialization of ecosystem services. Condition, on the other hand, reflects the vitality of ecosystems, ultimately their ability to provide those services over time. This work stream will focus on the technical application of Earth observation data to support the creation of both ecosystem extent and condition accounts. Some of the things we'd be thinking about within this, the research questions we'll be addressing within this work stream include, what are the Earth observation data and methods that are necessary for effectively delineating ecosystem condition? What ecosystem types can be observed through Earth observation? And in what cases do we need in situ data to supplement our Earth observation data? And then finally, when we're looking at ecosystem condition, how can Earth observation be used to develop indicators that are meaningfully linked to the accounts and the delivery of ecosystem services? Workstream 3 focuses specifically on those ecosystem services. Really, the objective of this workstream is to advance the identification, measurement, and monitoring of those services through Earth observation. And these methods can involve both the direct observation of services, but also the indirect observation of services as inputs into ecosystem service models, for example. And what we'll be exploring here is a wide range of approaches and tools that can be used to better either measure or model ecosystem services for the purposes of ecosystem accounting. So some of the key questions we'll be looking at are, which services can we directly measure with Earth observation? In which areas can we develop indicators or model variables that allow us to more effectively measure ecosystem services for ecosystem accounting? And what are the limitations of Earth observation data when it comes to measuring ecosystem services? And finally, the fourth work stream will focus on implementation and capacity building. The idea of this work stream is to lead capacity building, pilot testing, and to aid in the implementation of ecosystem accounts. This work stream will seek to provide technical guidance to partners who are implementing accounts, specifically providing that Earth observation lens, how Earth observation can be used to strengthen those accounts. And the work stream will focus on identifying the barriers to implementation, what are the needs, developing materials for outreach and education, and then advancing the applications of ecosystem accounting through Earth observation. Now, we're not the only people thinking about ecosystem accounting. There are many other organizations, some of which here who we work with, some who we would like to work closer with. GEO is a great opportunity for that in a lot of ways. It's a lot of the right people coming together and thinking about the really big issues. But we, of course, have the SEEA and the UN Statistical Division, the World Bank WAVES program, a handful of GEO initiatives such as GeoBond and GeoEco that have quite a lot of overlap with a lot of the work we're trying to do through ecosystem accounting. And then the Natural Capital Protocol, which is in many ways the private sector arm for ecosystem accounting to complement the public accounts. And there are also a lot of countries who are engaging in ecosystem accounting. I think by last count it was 59 now. So 59 countries are engaged in ecosystem accounting at some level, either developing partial accounts or piloting ecosystem accounts. So there's an increasing demand from countries to have this, and decision makers to have this sort of information to inform policy. So we think right now the time is really good to really lean in on ecosystem accounting. The current status of the initiative, the EO4EA GEO initiative, we recently established the Secretariat. Our work streams we've identified, and we've started to outline some of the activities within those work streams that will help us achieve our objectives. We're currently seeking new member countries and new member organizations to build that community of practice, to build a consensus around ecosystem accounting. And the EO4EA initiative website is going live this week, so we'll have a platform for sharing those ideas and starting to synthesize some of the work that's already been done in just the last 2 years. So our next steps, building on that community of practice, we're really looking here at GEO specifically, but more broadly to link with other initiatives. There's so much interesting work going on that we don't need to replicate efforts in many cases. We need to bring people into the fold. We're currently in the process of defining our governance structure under GEO and what that's going to look like moving forward. We're actively adding additional national and subnational partners, bringing them in to understand the work that's being done in their countries or in the sites that they're working. And finally, with the upcoming revision of the SEEA in 2020, we think this is a really good opportunity for Earth observation to insert itself and within the UN Statistical Division's guidelines to really make that part of what it is to conduct ecosystem accounting. And so with that, I'll just say thank you. And if you'd like, the website is not live this very moment, but I promise you by the end of the week it will be. And you can visit us at EO4EA.org, or you can reach out to us directly at secretariat.eo4ea.org. So thank you very much. Now, unfortunately, I'm staying up here, or fortunately for me, and I'll be presenting on some of the work that some of our other steering committee members have been working on in Europe. So I'll be presenting this work on behalf of Jan-Erik Petersen and Stephen King, Jan-Erik from the European Environment Agency and Stephen King from WCMC. The presentation I'm about to give is really interesting because it's one of 3 key syntheses that have come out within the last year on how Earth observation can be applied for ecosystem accounting. This particular report focused on the applications of the Copernicus missions. There was also one that was done by the Australian government, looking at how Earth observation can be used for their national statistics. And then there was a third report, which Paloma will briefly summarize in her presentation, that was created as a consortium for understanding how Earth observation can be used for official statistics. So talking a little bit here, the focus of this particular report is the opportunities for Earth observation data for integrating natural capital and ecosystem service accounting. This work was funded under the EU KIP INCA project, and while it focuses on European products and the Copernicus mission specifically, there are also a handful of global products that have come out of that were reviewed as well. The focus of this particular report was to focus on the biophysical elements of the ecosystem account. And the biophysical elements are your extent and condition, and then your ecosystem services from the biophysical side. And so Earth observation has an opportunity to contribute in many ways to all three of those biophysical elements. Satellite and in situ data can be used for delineating ecosystem extent, monitoring condition over time, and of course can be fed into many of the models that are needed for ecosystem services assessment. Very briefly, I'll just, I'm sure everyone here knows quite a bit about Copernicus, but I'll briefly talk about the network that was put up. But the key takeaways is that it's full, free, and open access data that has a continuity to it. So it's something that is planned to continue over time, and it monitors atmospheric, marine, land, climate, and also has applications for emergency management security. Specifically for ecosystem accounting, the report focuses on the land services of the Copernicus mission. And those include, are collected at multiple scales, I should say, with a handful of global products that are being developed, as well as pan-European products. And then if you drill down, there are even very locally based products, especially in urban areas around Europe. And all of this information is this satellite-derived information is combined with imagery and in-situ reference data to create a real suite of products and services which can be applied for ecosystem accounting. So to look kind of in a more visual way, what that portfolio looks like, you have your high-resolution 20-meter pixel size Sentinel-2 imagery. You have very high-resolution 2.5-meter pixels across Europe. And then you also have a handful of SAR applications that have been used to both enhance derived products and create the EU DEM, for example. So what the report sought to do was to look at the 45 different individual products that were developed under the Land Copernicus mission, and then partition them essentially into the biophysical categories that they would be best suited to inform. So either extent, condition, or ecosystem services. A quick note on that is that each of the 45 products is only put into one box, even acknowledging that there are sometimes when a product could be used for multiple, both extent and condition, for example. But for simplicity, everything was either matched into one category or another. And then within the database that was created, they also included all of the relevant metadata and information on the accuracies and limitations of those data sets, which is something that's often left out at this sort of analysis. So to break down the data set that was created, the database, I should say, that was created, you have your 45 Copernicus-related outputs. Of those, they're divided into the 3 thematic groups. And then within each group, they're specifically assigned to a subgroup. So for example, under extent, you have your products related to land cover, land use, and then ecological data. Within condition, you have the pressures, the physical and chemical composition, the structural information, and then the functional data. And then finally, within services, we have provisioning services, regulating services, cultural services, and of course the demand for ecosystem services. And all of this information then is captured within this Excel database. And unfortunately, it's a little hard to see, but down at the bottom there, it's broken into 3 tabs. A README, which is obviously to provide all this background. There's also a database tool which allows you to interactively query the database depending on the needs that you have. For instance, if you need to figure out which data sets are available for understanding a specific aspect of condition or extent, you can easily query the database. And then finally, there's the database of products itself, which outlines all 45 products and goes into detail on their parameters. So if we zoom in a little bit, you can see, for example, the FLPAR product, you have the data description, and then you have your either extent or condition. So it's not a match for extent, but it is a match for condition. And then specifically, it targets which aspect of condition it would be most suited for. In this case, functional data. Now I'm just going to put this up there, and we can also share this information as well. But the database is freely available online. You can access it, download it, interact with it here at this website, and I encourage you to take a look. It's really quite impressive. Now, if we break down the 45 products, we can also look at how they contribute to ecosystem accounting in a more holistic way to understand what are some of the gaps. Of the 45 products, 14 of them were a match for ecosystem extent. Of those 14, 11 of them were related to land cover products. So the vast majority of them are related to land cover products. There were 2 that are related to more land use information, and actually only 1 product that actually matched to ecological data, and that was the delineation of riparian areas and riparian vegetation. So you can see here that there's definitely a large bias towards land cover when you're thinking about ecosystem extent. Ecosystem condition actually represented 25 of the 45 products. And the vast majority of that is in the structural and functional elements, the things that tell you about the biophysical characteristics of the area. While there was much less in the physical chemical, most of that has to do with soil information. There was some information on pressures as well, primarily related to climate pressures, things like snow extent and burn scar area. And then finally, of all 45 products, only 2 products were identified to contribute to the ecosystem services. And those 2 were the EU digital elevation model, which can be used as an input for modeling ecosystem services, particularly hydrological models, and the urban population by polygon, which can be used on the other side of ecosystem service assessment for a better understanding the demand of those ecosystem services. So ultimately, not very many of the Copernicus products directly relate to the ecosystem service aspect of the physical accounts. So what are some of the key characteristics for EO data that you would apply for ecosystem accounting? Well, of course, comprehensive coverage was one of the key advantages. And it also needs to be collected at a resolution that captures the finer grained mosaics of land cover patterns for the information that you need to collect to actually conduct ecosystem accounting. Yep. It also needs to be, you have to have a temporal resolution. It has to be at a start and end period for that area, and it has to be consistent across time and space, and hopefully continue into the future. Finally, you need to have, you have to know what the data is actually saying. So within the data set, they have all this information stored within the metadata, all the basic resolutions and temporal, spatial information, as well as, interestingly, a description of the limitations and the accuracy of those data products, and suggestions on how they could be improved specifically for ecosystem accounting. So in conclusion, EO data does provide a really good solution for long-term support for ecosystem extent and condition. It can be used for ecosystem services, but there are still many gaps there. And there's ultimately a need to integrate data from multiple domains to capture the different dimensions of ecosystems. What are the next steps? Well, it's really identifying where EO data can be developed to address data gaps, where in situ data is necessary, either with EO data or on its own. And finally, this entire assessment was done on the Copernicus products. And ultimately, there's a lot more EO data out there that can be utilized for ecosystem accounting. So this is, in many ways, a plea to this community to use this as an example and then to build upon it. Integrating data from the other space agencies present here at GEO. So we'll leave an open call if anyone is interested in taking up that torch. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we'll just tee up Paloma's presentation here.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paloma Merodio. I'm from INEGI, the National Statistics and Geographic Institution of Mexico. And today I'm going to share with you the state of our natural capital accounting and evaluation of ecosystems and what have we done so far. I think one of the advantages that we have in Mexico is the institutional arrangement, and especially I think we're one of the few institutions in the world that have the NSO within the same place, under the same roof. It's the Statistical Office, but also the Geographical and Natural Resource Office. So in this sense, this project is really one of the most transversal projects that we have within our organization. Since 2014, there was a pilot project in Mexico that started, and in this pilot project, there was an interagency technical group that was established, and since the beginning, it has been a very, as I was saying, a transversal project within our organization, but also with other stakeholders and other ministries from the Mexican government that have been involved in this project. As I said, in 2014 was the first pilot. We were part of a pilot from the ANCA, the Advancing Natural Capital Accounting, also with Mexico, Bhutan, Chile, Indonesia, Vietnam, Mauritius, and South Africa. And in the second stage that started last year and will last until 2020, only Mexico, Brazil, China, India, and South Africa are participating. And the main objectives of this project are to compile select ecosystem accounts, to develop guidelines and methodology that contribute to the implementation of the SEEA, and to conduct capacity building and knowledge sharing activities. These are some of the pictures of all the meetings that we had, with the people from UNSDE and also with our stakeholders in Mexico from different ministries. So the ecosystem classification uses as a base the INEGI's vegetation and land use classification, which is our land cover map. We have highly detailed classification system on many types of natural vegetation. We have 57 vegetation types. And then what we did is, for this project, we aggregated up into 14 vegetation classes, 4 land use classes: agricultural, forest plantations, human settlements, and ancillary classes as well, but water bodies, ocean. Here we're also including land management restrictions to some area, like we're considering federal protected natural areas, and also land tenure, private property, but also communal property. Almost 50% of our territory is in what we call the ejido, or communal property, so that's something that we're taking into account. This is just a sequence of the accounts that was already presented by Daniel. And the 4 topics that we are focusing on now are soil, water, carbon, and biodiversity. We did the pilot for the state of Aguascalientes, which is zoomed in here. And as I said, we used the vegetation and land use. We have the series of 2002, but up until 2017. And we aggregated for 14 classes, as you can see in the picture. And here it's for the state of Aguascalientes. We included the natural protected areas and the land tenure as well. And what we can see is that there's an expansion of urban areas, of course, particularly in private land and also in ejido and communal land. And that there is, for example, we can see that there was no change in the coniferous forest from 27 up until 2015. In terms of the changes in, also because of the core scale of the ecosystem maps, we have certain challenges to face in terms of what we can get out of this information. but well, we can see, for example, in the table for each kind of pine forest, oak wetlands, I don't even know how to pronounce this in English, sorry. But well, for all these different kinds of vegetation, you can see how it has changed over the years and specifically for different land tenure. Well, here is the potential carbon capture also in Aguascalientes. For these, we use the information provided from the National Forest Commission. As I said, this project includes the participation of many agencies, and we also take into account their information. And well, this is one of the maps that we've developed. And here you can see the carbon stored and the potential carbon captured from 2007 up until 2011. And with this, for the different ecosystems, we've been able to do some evaluating of the ecosystems in Aguascalientes. So if we take into account the price of $4 of CO2 equivalent, then you can see that the carbon captured service for Aguascalientes ecosystems might be valued in around $870,000 per year. So here we also include the social cost of carbon, which we also take a reference scenario for 2020 that was established in a recent publication, and in $32.5. And you can see that our calculations, we would say that the carbon captured service provided by Aguascalientes ecosystems might be valued around $7 million per year. Another service that we are mapping and evaluating is a surface water supply. This is like a very plain model where we are working in water yield, and is estimated as a contribution of each portion of the landscape to surface runoff, considering the effects of land use and land cover, and then subtracting these from the average annual precipitation. It's quite a simple model, but we started with this, and we're also taking into account data from our national water organization, and well, this is the result for Aguascalientes shown also in this slide. So what are the lessons and challenges that we've faced in this project? Is that, I mean, the abundance of data and information to evaluate key ecosystem services at country level, of course, is a challenge, and data that is available was collected for other purposes other than evaluating ecosystem services. So we need to work with the data, reformat, perform additional calculations, and this is why it is so important to work closely with our stakeholders and understand that, I mean, in the future, if we want to get this kind of counts done regularly, we would need them to really put more attention in terms of how they're capturing the data and how they need to provide it, so this can be easily done, and of course in the long run and periodically. Also, spatial and temporal resolution of data, I mean, sometimes is insufficient to evaluate ecosystems at the local level. As we saw with Aguascalientes state, we sometimes have trouble with the resolution. So we would need to have more detailed data. Also for specific services like cultural and regulatory services, we still need data that we currently don't have. And well, as Daniel was saying, the results of ecosystem services evaluation will be used for public policies and for nature conservation measures. So this is why we consider that this information is crucial, and we are looking forward in continuing with this project and following up with more services for next year. In a couple of weeks, we'll have some meetings with the stakeholders to define the plan ahead and to really start deciding where should we go more in depth in terms of ecosystem services schemes, environmental responsibility and liability, and environmental impact assessment. So that will be it in terms of this project, and also, I mean, I wanted to share a little bit about what Max was telling you for this report, where Mexico participated along with other countries. So just let me put it out. I don't have slides about this, and probably if there's someone here from some of the countries that participated in this, the name of the report is In-Depth Review of Satellite Imagery, Earth Observations Technology as Input to National Statistical Organization Programs. And this report was put together by the Conference of European Statisticians, because regularly they select statistical areas where they want to go in depth, and this year they decided to go into how NSOs are using satellite imagery to contribute to their purpose, and wanted to share some of the main results that were found in this paper that was, I believe it's not published yet, but it was circulated among members in the last meeting. And specifically, the report talks about how Earth observation inputs are commonly used to support agricultural statistics and environmental accounts. They show that there's an increase in the activity in level of use of Earth observations for sustainable development indicators such as land use, climate change, water stress, and water quality. The report talks about how Australia and Mexico are using Earth observations for statistical purposes, and also shows some cases for Austria and Canada. And well, the lessons learned with these case studies are that NSOs often lack the expertise in how to process and apply Earth observations data, and that there is a risk of overconfidence in Earth observation data as a complete solution for NSO needs in a given area. Transformation of business processes to accept Earth observations inputs requires time, budget, and also institutional commitment. And despite these important considerations, the review found real opportunities for NSO in this area to strengthen the Earth observations data in a macro level collection and reporting. Statistical programs related to agriculture and environmental reporting are well aligned to this scale reporting. There is growing attention related to sustainable development goals and the indicators supporting them. Earth observation data are well aligned to a significant number of targeted indicators. The complexity and cost involved in leveraging Earth observation data as input to NSO programs provides a compelling reason to collaborate on the development of approaches and their implementations. But also, the report found 3 recommendations for discussion, and these are: first, that NSO should use the SDG framework to drive collaboration on Earth observation-based research. Also, that NSO should collaborate on a generalized approach to using Earth observation data to support and target indicators to further reduce costs in processing and integrating Earth observation and enabled SDG reporting. And finally, that NSOs, as a community of practice, should collaborate with national, international Earth observation community to articulate and implement a generalized approach to Earth observations, data collections, and processing as input to SDG reporting. Such a development would go a long way to bring Earth observation inputs to a level comparable to many other inputs used currently by NSOs. So I think with this is a good summary of what the report found. I'm not sure when they will release it online or when it's going to be available, but probably soon because it was already distributed. I guess for this session, what is important is to know that Earth observations for ecosystem accounting is something that most NSOs are looking at and working on, and probably that's the main takeaway that I would take for this session about the report. I think with that I would end it here. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Paloma. Just switch up here. Yeah, thanks very much for that, Paloma. And thanks for taking the time to speak a little bit about the report produced by the governments of Mexico and Canada and Australia. I think it's important to emphasize that there are two major reports that came out in the past year on this subject, on Earth observation applications to accounting or to national statistics. Paloma described one of them, and the sort of link with NSO's national statistics offices, and the other report is the one that Max presented. And Mark, later during the question and answer period, you might want to talk about the report that you released the year before. Give you a chance to talk about that. And for those of you who came in late, just a really quick recap of the rest of the agenda. So we're going to present very, very quickly a case study from Liberia. It'll take just about 10 minutes, and then we're going to move on to Roger, who's going to talk about his continued work on units and some major new work that he's doing. So very briefly on this, I'm just going to set the stage, and then Max is going to present some of the more technical material. But, you know, in ecosystem accounting, there's been a lot of work by the Canadians, the Australians, the government of Mexico, the United States, the European Union have the KIP Inca project. And, you know, the question remains, for those countries, those developing countries, you know, we need cases for those countries that have the strong political will and that vision, but they may not have the capacity or the data to be able to do ecosystem accounting. And I think these are countries that may have a high dependence on ecosystem services for livelihoods and who may need it the most. And so I think we need more, I would posit that we need more successful cases in developing countries. And so I mentioned earlier the quote from Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, the president of Liberia, or the former president, I should say, and the work of the Gaborone Declaration for the Sustainability in Africa. And that's an interesting regional effort where 14 countries have at the president or ministerial level committed to natural capital accounting as part of their sustainability path, which is extremely exciting news. And so a lot of the work that we do, both as SEEA and EO4EA, is to support what's going on there. In the case of Liberia, Conservation International is supporting the government of Liberia on a GEF project from the Global Environment Facility to build the capacity in natural capital accounting, as well as provide some of the data needs. And so that GEF project will begin sometime early next year. But over the past couple of years, we've been sort of struggling with the idea, well, we don't want to have a 5-year project wait until we develop ecosystem extent maps. So we went ahead and formed a collaboration with NASA to map Liberia. And so that when the project gets started, we'll start with that ecosystem extent map already in place. And so NASA, with their gracious support, we started an R&D collaboration. They're supporting 4 institutions, Mercy Corps, Microsoft, Google, and Conservation International. And our intent is to map 4 different countries in sub-Saharan Africa that are part of the GDSA, starting with Liberia. So I'll turn it over to Max to talk just a little bit about this project before we pass it on to Roger.
All right, so just for context, these are the GSA countries. But what I'll talk about is the approach that we decided to take when we set out to do some ecosystem mapping in Liberia. And essentially, we kind of came at it from 2 angles. One, looking at Earth observation data to create your classic land use, land cover maps. And then given the lack of data or data poor area in Liberia, we decided to use a modeling-based approach to try to get at a better delineation of natural ecosystem types. Ultimately combining and aggregating that information up into a final ecosystem extent product. So this is the outline of the land cover methods, courtesy of NASA. So you can see it's very simple. But in reality, this is pretty much what it is. You take a dense time series of satellite imagery. You combine that to map out individually all of the land cover and land use classes that are important for your ecosystem accounting effort. And then you composite that map, you bring together land cover classes, and perform accuracy assessments to understand your uncertainties and the trade-offs between the classes that you've mapped. And as we're doing that, the preliminary product here is a new land cover land use map of Liberia. And the thing to highlight here, although you can't see it very well at the bottom, is that because we're looking a lot at coastal ecosystems and the value of mangroves, we've been able to disaggregate mangrove type in the map, and also incorporate plantation information to disaggregate oil palm and rubber plantations from natural forest, which is 2 important economic activities in Liberia. To complement the land cover mapping exercise, we also perform some ecosystem modeling, specifically the generalized dissimilarity model, which seeks to just understand the biological uniqueness of a given area within a country, and to essentially compare that against the environmental variables there. And the advantage to a model like this is that it works well in data poor areas. You can still gain a lot of information where you may not have forest inventories and systematic samples. So by applying the GDM model, we end up with an output something like this. On the left, you have an RGB of the top 3 principal components of the model. And then on the right, we have essentially a cluster of those areas. So clustering them into essential unique ecosystems. And this is just a preliminary cut, identifying the proper number of classes, an iterative process. And so we've started to engage with stakeholders in Liberia across the ministries and in the institutions in country to present and validate the land cover maps, to identify biodiversity maps that can be used for ecosystem type. And ultimately, the next step will be to merge the land cover and ecosystem type maps to develop an ecosystem extent map specifically for Liberia, and then work with stakeholders on the ground to refine that product so they can use it for their accounting efforts. So with that, I'll just say thank you, and we'll pass the floor over to Roger, who can really dig into ecosystem extent and do it some proper justice. Here you are, Roger.
Thank you very much.
So questions afterwards?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Roger Sayre. I work at the U.S. Geological Survey at the headquarters. I'm in the Land Change Science program. I'm an ecosystems geographer, so I have the great good fortune of being able to map ecosystems as the majority of my work day. And I'm going to tell you about some of that ecosystem mapping that I've done. And it fits perfectly into this field of ecosystem accounting, although I'm doing it more from an ecosystem conservation and priority setting motivation. But whatever your interest is, whether it's ecosystem conservation or ecosystem accounting or ecosystem resource management, it is essential that you know what ecosystems are out there on the landscape where they are, what their distributions are, and what condition they're in. And so I'm stuck back, fixated probably, in that first step of knowing what the ecosystems are out on the landscape and mapping them. And of course, the output from ecosystem mapping is ecosystem extent. So let's start off with a little afternoon quiz, see how we're doing. Where are we? Well, we know we're in Japan, right? I hope we know that. And here's Kyoto here, and here's Hiroshima here. Probably you can't see those. But what island are we on? Well, let's just see. Oh, we're on Honshu, one of the main islands in Japan. Well, that is an output from a tool that I'm going to show you today and that we're actually launching here in this event called the Global Island Explorer. Because wouldn't it be nice if there was a tool that allowed you to just query any one of these many islands, the green ones or even these little tiny orange ones, to see what it was, how big it was, or even what tectonic plate it is attached to. So we're working along those lines, and I'm going to show you the results of that. But just to back up to the beginning, I am a task lead for GeoEco, the Geo-Ecosystems Initiative, and there is the task that I lead as a global ecosystem mapping task to produce standardized, robust, and practical maps for terrestrial freshwater marine domains. And that's a U.S. responsibility, and I work extremely closely with Esri on all this work, and they are just the greatest colleagues to have interested in and working on this initiative. We started off with global terrestrial ecosystems. We call them ecological land units, ELUs. We derived them from studying global bioclimate, global landforms, global lithology, and global land cover. We did that at a 250-meter spatial resolution, which is pretty good resolution for global work. We combined those inputs in a massive GIS stack and looked at the unique resultant combinations of those four inputs, and we ended up mapping some 3,500 global ecological land units in a standardized process. And because we have all these ecosystems now, it's easy for us to extract any one type of ecosystem out of it. And we were interested actually in pulling out of those 3,500 ecosystems which ones were mountain ecosystems. And so we made a new global mountains map. And then we built a tool called the Global Mountain Explorer, which allows you to visualize and query our new global mountains map. And we have a paper on this if you're interested. And not only ours, but to look at the previous existing global mountain distribution map, global mountain maps, and their characterizations. So this is a really nice resource that just allows anybody with an internet connection to just explore. It's a window into a massive data set that we have on global mountains. So it's a way to expose the data as a resource to a much broader community. We're always interested in doing that. Having finished the ELUs, we moved into the marine domain, and we made a map of what we're calling ecological marine units, EMUs, published that work last year. And here they are. These sort of larger blobs, polygons in the ocean, those are, at least on the surface, those are the ecological marine units. And that work is really innovative because it's true 3D. It was a 3D, we used 56 million points of data from NOAA, their World Ocean Atlas. We did statistical clustering on temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and 3 nutrients, the things that matter in the marine, chemical, and physical environment. And we clustered those in 3D, and so we have true 3D maps of the distribution of these ecological marine units. And so again, this is for the work I'm doing for GeoEco. Here's where we are already. We've finished the ELUs. These are the ELUs. And then I was just talking about the EMUs. That's all this. And again, that one is just at the surface. Next step, or in progress really, is ecological coastal units. We will shortly embark on ecological freshwater units, and we have part of our group very interested in ecological benthic units, EBUs. So about a year ago, over Halloween, so it was a year ago, this group of people met in Redlands, California at Esri headquarters to sit down and discuss how we would map global ecological coastal units, because we always get a group of international subject matter experts in this. And these are coastal ecosystem mapping people with Esri staff and USGS staff. And a year later, we have put this paper out that describes our plans on how to do this ecological coastal unit mapping. And what we realized straight away was we needed a new global shoreline vector as the sort of spatial skeleton for mapping coastal units out into the water and a little bit landwards. And we looked at all the candidate choices for global shoreline vectors, and for a variety of reasons, some were proprietary, some were old and coarse, some are like the OpenStreetMap, are not standardized, or we couldn't tell in what places they were standardized, or where it was good and where it was even complete. So we just concluded we'll have to make our own new global shoreline vector, which we did by going up into the cloud in Google Earth Engine and looking at 2014 Landsat imagery and interpreting that up there. You take the algorithm up so you don't have to process all the heavy imagery. And then you do the classification. So the analyst starts in this upper left-hand corner of the world and pulls up the satellite imagery and just selects, water, 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 land, 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 water, water, land, 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 and just sort of moves. It's a moving window classification, and she actually ran the entire coastline of the world with that feature extraction, just a Herculean effort. And so we had this brand new global shoreline vector, and we realized that, if we just apply polygon topology to this vector, then we'll have global islands, because it is a fact that every terrestrial landmass on the planet is indeed an island, no matter how big. So we have the global shoreline vector, and we didn't set out to make it, but we realized we were also sitting on the best global island database that there is. We categorize islands into 3 classes: continental mainlands, of which there were 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, separated at these 2 canals. Where is it? There it is. So those are the 5 continental mainlands. Not a single island off the mainland. And then we had the next size class, which were large islands, seen in blue here. Those were any islands over 1 square kilometer. And then exaggerated here in red, because you couldn't actually see them at this zoom level, are what we called small islands, and that would be anything smaller than a square kilometer. And then we ran the statistics on that. Turns out there's 5 of these. There's almost 22,000 islands greater than 1 square kilometer, and then there's almost 320,000 islands that are less than 1 square kilometer. That was a research finding, and again, we have their areas and their length of coastline and some other attributes like name and tectonic plate. The global shoreline vector is in red here. The yellow is the GSHSS, the Global Self-Organizing High-Resolution Hierarchical Shoreline first time I ever managed to remember. And that's the old one that existed. Great piece of work. It's over 20 years old now, and it looks like to me it has a kind of a systematic shift. Anyway, we're really happy with the fit of the new vector on the coastline when you look on top of an image like that. This happens to be a little archipelago on the extreme west end of the Florida Keys. And so with all these new data, the first thing that we wanted to do was make a window into the new global islands data. So stealing 100% from the Global Mountain Explorer that I showed earlier, we built a Global Island Explorer. This is the splash page. These are the collaborators. Here's a couple of geo groups here, MBON and Blue Planet, helping us out there. There's Esri. And so we built a Global Island Explorer. This is the welcome page, and then you hit the link to go to the tool. And you're presented with a global map. The green islands now are the big islands, and they're orange are the small islands. And so you go to your favorite islands somewhere. Everybody has one. I happen to live in the Dominican Republic. This is Hispaniola. And so now we're pretty far zoomed in, but it's green, so it's still a big island, and orange, small islands. Well, there's some here. I don't know if you can see it. You know, they're still pretty small. And then if you click any island in this tool, then you get its name and its size, class, and the other attributes that we carry. This is just a really simple viewer. It's a visualization and query tool, but it's one of those elegantly simple tools that, you know, it's ridiculously easy to use and understand, I think. So it's really interesting. I did a rapid ecological assessment when I was working at the Nature Conservancy before USGS on this part of the Dominican Republic, and there's an island there called Isla Saona that I know very well because we studied it. And so I could get to it just since I know where it is, just by zooming in. But we also have this type in a name, and so here we type in, for example, Isla Saona, and it starts to zoom us in there. And notice that we lost the solid fill color, because when you get zoomed in, then you actually want to see the vector. And so now we are at Isla Saona. Sorry. And it's been zoomed in a little bit, and here again, if we click it, we get the details. This is nice. This is a nice feature. You can look at the data on top of a number of different base maps. This is pretty standard stuff now with these web browsers. In this case, we're looking at the World Topographic Base Map, and I see a discrepancy here between the topographic base map and our vector. So that gave me a little pause the first time I saw it. So I zoomed in a little bit closer, and I changed from the base map to the imagery, and look, those vectors hug that coastline perfectly. So that was a confidence builder. It's apparently the topographic base map is a little bit shifted in that area, and actually I've since discovered that elsewhere in the Caribbean. And then here is Isla Catalanita. It's an orange outline, so that's a very small island. I think it's only 0.2 square kilometers. So again, the point of all this is we have all this new polygon island data and a really easy way for people to explore it and to use it. And again, I go into this from the motivation of ecosystem conservation, and of course, all these UN Sustainable Development Goals for terrestrial freshwater and marine say something about the need to conserve terrestrial freshwater and marine ecosystems, and so I map them because I'm interested in conserving them. But for EO4EA, ecosystem accounting, can we use these? Well, I think so. It's so new. The paper on this just came out 2 weeks ago. We haven't really tested any of this out, but this creature here is a New Caledonian crested gecko. They are wonderful pets. I have one. We hatched him from an egg 12 years ago. His name is Flash. And he looks exactly like that. He's just the greatest pet. Well, this is Flash's homeland. These geckos are endemic to New Caledonia, and specifically to this little island here, which is the Isle of Pines in New Caledonia. And is it the Isle of Pines? Well, we clicked on it in the Global Island Explorer. Yes, it is the Isle of Pines. Well, this is what it says in Wikipedia. The crested gecko is endemic to New Caledonia and found on the Isle of Pines and surrounding islets. Okay, now it's getting interesting because it's not just on the Isle of Pines or this other big one, Quatumo. It's on the surrounding islets. So now we're talking about little tiny islands because look, those are orange. So every one of those is less than a square kilometer. Many of those just have to be rocky outcrops with some shrubs on them. And so, oh, and I just wanted to show you what it looks like over the satellite image. And I clicked on one of these little islets, and sure enough, it's null. That's not its name, by the way. This is kind of a bug. We got to work this out. It doesn't have a name, so in the database, it's null. So it came up as null, which is the case with all these. But we have them. We have them as data. And again, you couldn't get data like this before. I mean, there are global geography data sets that are really generalized, but you can never get these kind of data. I was talking to a woman in the Maldives, showed her all these islands, and she was just shocked. She said, this is the first time I've ever seen my country's thousands of islands as data on a map. Yeah, you can see them if you zoom in on Google Earth, but you could never get data for them. And so we're giving her some pretty good data. She was really happy about that. Okay, so we're talking about island ecosystem extent accounting. Accounting is always going to happen in a spreadsheet. So I created a spreadsheet, and here's Isle of Pines and that other big one. There were two big ones, Quatumo. And then I just went and got them all off the Global Island Explorer. There are 23 islets, unnamed. They're all small, and there are their actual sizes. So this part of the spreadsheet is real. This part of the spreadsheet is made up. But the point is, in an illustrative way, if you are interested in doing island ecosystem extent accounting because you are interested in these geckos, which have value, by the way, in the pet trade, they're everywhere. You can get them as pets. I have one. But they're also where they're from. On these islets, they're being considered for at least vulnerable status, if not more endangered than that. So there's two values that they have, perhaps. One is in the pet trade extraction, and one is as tourism value, or as, I don't know, conservation value. And so the point is, if you, and the scientists know this, if you know, like, the gecko is 100%, it's all over this little tiny islet, but it's not even found on these, and then there's a lot of it here, and then you also know, what's like these 100% are on two little tiny islets. Again, this is made up, but just for the point, that's important if you're going to do accounting in either an economic or non-economic valuation sense. And then, of course, these little islets are going to be in varying states of condition. And so I think you get the point. You could come up with some expert rules or some algorithms even to populate these two columns for the ultimate valuation exercise. So clearly I don't have any idea how to do ecosystem accounting because I'm just making this up. But the point is, ecosystem extent is, as Daniel said and Max said, it's foundational. I mean, you have to start with that because these ecosystems are, they're the spatial accounting framework. They're the essential spatial accounting units. And so if we have mapped them all out, so we have them, and I could think of maybe 10 other examples for which they could be used or useful, but it's just brand new data, so I don't have any real results. But I hope that was illustrative and that you like the gecko. In conclusion then, this EO4EA and all of the previous speakers said it, it's happening. National Statistics Offices are interested in it. Earth observation really supports ecosystem accounting. I failed to mention that, of course, we use Earth observation to do a lot of the ecosystem delineation. Not exclusively by any means. We don't look at a satellite image and delineate the ecosystems and their extents right off the image. We model them up. But all of our inputs, the DEM stuff, it's all Earth observation. A lot of the land cover stuff, Earth observation. And there's an increasingly large quantity of global ecosystems data coming out of GeoEco, and which I think can be put to use for ecosystem accounting. And we have this new high-resolution map and data layer on global islands. So we're launching this Global Island Explorer today. There's a couple of these handouts in the back. The digital version of this will go live, I think, at 5:30. I've been promised by people who know how to tweet that there will be a social media outreach, and I won't even be able to know if that's true or not because I'm not a social media person at all. I'm sorry to report. But anyway, this new resource, the data and the tool are going live today, and it's really a pleasure for me to be able to launch this resource in this event, and an even greater pleasure to be working with Max and Daniel and the others on this EO4EA. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Roger, and congratulations on this work. I think you're marching along. We didn't mention it earlier, everything in ecosystem accounting is about units. And I think Roger's work has advanced us considerably in being able to deal with these different kinds of units. And this is an important one, particularly since this geo is happening in the Asia-Pacific region. You have countries like Indonesia and Philippines that are embarking on ecosystem accounting. They're doing that on a subnational trial basis, but as they begin to grapple with national level accounting, the 7,000 or so islands in the Philippines, I think this is going to be a very, very important layer in this region. So with that, thank you for being patient throughout all the presentations. I think we'd like to open up the floor for questions, comments, discussion. We're a small group, so rather than have the panelists relegated at that table, I think we could just turn our chairs around, and I'll open the floor. Are there any questions to begin with? Please.
Yes.
And identify yourself, please, while you go on.
Yeah. Good afternoon to Japan. Good morning to Central Europe. I'm Carsten Wettmann, Geo-Principal Automate for Germany. And I don't have a question, just more comment on the project in Liberia, a general remark. Liberia is inactive in Geo. We don't see anybody from Liberia in any Geo meetings. This is a problem we have with several African states. So it would be very fine if you get people in Liberia to get them connected to Geo via the Geo Secretariat in Geneva, even if they focus on ecosystems, on forest monitoring, on biodiversity, whatever, so that they can join via WebEx. There's even travel support, funding possible for them, so that we have active national people for Geo. And the second big issue is always with all these projects, the data which is developed, created, etc. Please put it in the Geos portal. Otherwise, it's lost. And we have many tries all over the place to get all these documentation from every single portal into the Geos portal. And that's the big value of Geos, that everything is stored, even the project may change or may be finishing, then in future times other people can work with your data. So that would be nice. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. And you want to talk a little bit about the data
Sure.
issue?
data cubes together, and we're trying to future-proof these efforts. And so being able to find smart, intelligent, cost-effective ways of being able to transfer the ability to do accounting to, I think the big difference with accounting is that these are led by the governments. It's one of those things that you can't do an assessment in Washington or Paris or Rome or London. And so we have to start thinking about that transference. And I think data cubes and smart handling of data is the way to go. Appreciate that comment.
I have some question. My name is Palma Blonda from Italy, CNR, and I'm involved in a project named Eco Potential, which is focusing on the integrated use of Earth observation data and in situ data for ecosystem and ecosystem services monitoring. We are not dealing with ecosystem accounting. But my question is, when you consider and you apply your model to the ecosystem extent map to evaluate ecosystem accounting, are you considering the condition of that specific ecosystem that you are considering, especially if the ecosystem is not composed by just one class, but it is composed by more components. Let me make an example. In the case of a coastal ecosystem, you have something which is related to the coastal areas, the inland, let me say, area, and also some part, or I don't know how large, a component related to the water sea. In some cases, you can have let me say, a degraded condition of just one of these components, and the same homogeneous condition of the other components of your ecosystem. Could you weight in some way your accounting analysis, or you do not need? I'm not expert of accounting, but I would like to know if it is important for you to take in account the condition of the specific components of your ecosystem. This is one question. I have some other.
Well, you want to
Sure.
on the, because I think one of the questions here is on extent.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So it is always best practice to be able to, at least geographically, to disaggregate your ecosystem types down to their essential sort of building block areas. So if somebody's saying that you have a coastal ecosystem, but you in fact know that there are nearshore parts to that and onshore parts to that, and if you disaggregated those down, then you can get to the ecosystem condition or services assessment of the larger coastal ecosystem as a roll-up from all of the sub-units. So it's always good practice to disaggregate down and attribute all those building blocks and then roll them up. So that's about the geographic part. But the other thing that you're bringing up is things are often bundled. Ecosystem services are bundled, and we have 5 or 6 or 10 coming out of the same area. And so the ecosystem extent part is actually pretty easy. It's just where is it? What is its boundary? But the ecosystem condition attribute is pretty tricky, because somebody has to decide what that condition is, and that is a function sometimes of what the service that you're interested in. So you can ascribe a condition based on whatever the service of interest is. And so it does get really complicated when you start breaking land areas down and trying to think about their different conditions, their fitness really for delivering different kinds of ecosystem services. So it's just something that we're going to be figuring out how to do, I think, as we go along, as
includes also fluxes among the different components of the ecosystem. So, again, but you answered me, it is a complex new thing. When you try to make the ecosystem accounting, if you also consider fluxes of carbon or energy or water, in the model useful to provide this accounting?
I've seen models where they are considering that, and so
For the accounting,
Yeah,
not for
not-
functioning.
yeah, for the accounting, I've seen it, and it's not so much the ecological processes that between ecosystems. It's more on the, the production of the service, the consumption of the service, which is almost always somewhere else from where it was produced, and then the lateral, the flux really of that service from where it was produced to where it was consumed. So I've seen models that are at least trying to incorporate this.
You guys have response as well?
Well, I was just going to comment that that's really a challenge, and that's where, as I was saying in the presentation, I mean, with our land cover land use maps, we have 57 class of vegetation, and there we distinguish between, I mean, the state of that. But then for the ecosystem accounting, we ended up aggregating everything again. So I think that's like a challenge that up until when you disaggregate that much, and then how you aggregate to actually do it. Yeah, I think it's a very critical point, and we're definitely very need like how to have that balance, right?
Before we go to Mark, it's important to note that where we are in terms of state of play. And so the United Nations Statistics Division is coming out with their second version of the ecosystem account by 2020. And so there's a lot of folks thinking about these issues, really upgrade what was very, very broad, initially broad guidance, if you will, on ecosystem condition. That being a tricky thing, and it's forcing us to make decisions on 25 years of ecological science, and so that's an ongoing process now where ecologists and geographers and economists will meet together. And so if there's an interest from your group, that seems to put you in touch with the right people, because I think what's really been interesting over the past few years is this massive response from various members of the community in ecosystem accounting, accountants, geographers, and so this transversal thing that Paloma mentioned in Mexico, I think that's also happening globally to really improve on these guidelines, hoping to one day elevate them to standards. Mark.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm Mark Noor. A question for Paloma or whoever wants to jump in. Just to sketch the situation, I'm from Holland. We're very good at doing the natural capital accounting. We're not that good in acting on it. So that's one point. Second one, in Mauritius, I was involved or evaluated a study that they did on water accounting. Very soon they discovered this is not sustainable because of the tourism. Then the discussion became very political and unfriendly. And another example, I'm also involved in a project on Earth observation solutions for agriculture in Africa. There I had 34 categories of Earth observation applications that people could choose as a priority. The accounting, the
private sector, it's even more evident, but on the national level, I don't really see it yet. How we can actually make a change with the accounts we're actually developing.
Start with Mexico response, and we'll get to.
I think we're not in that stage yet. Actually, this is just like, as I said, like a pilot project, and I mean, right now the interest of INEGI as a national statistical office is very big to incorporate this in our national accounts. But still, we don't have like I would say we're not in a stage where we can bring these to policymakers to make something out of it. We're still in, like I would say, like in a pilot project, and this is not as mature as we would like to. And the idea would be that in a couple of years it could be, and then we can use this for those purposes. But I mean, not. I would say we're not in that stage yet.
I just wanted to add to that, and then the uncertainty question deal with maybe over many years. But you raise a really interesting point, because what has been very positive is all these pilot examples coming on. The interest is such that countries are experimenting, and that's very, very I think important. But you're right. At some point, there will have to be really clear cases of the application. And it's, you build an account. It's akin to building a Ferrari, but not taking it out for a test drive. So I think post-accounting applications of this kind of work, taking the results and really spending some time, applying them to the right policy context and decisions. I think that's coming soon. There are examples in Costa Rica, for example, where the Minister of Environment, the new Minister of Environment, has made this the very top of his agenda to really get national accounting driving his political and policy decisions. And so Costa Rica has done a lot of work in the same program that Paloma mentioned earlier. And I think that's, again, it's a very positive sign, but I think those examples, we still have a lot of work to do to really bring those to the fore. Does anyone want to take an uncertainty question?
And yeah, I dabble on certain
Go for it, Max.
So I mean, of course, that's the ultimate goal, is to get this into the spreadsheet, into the economic indicators. And I found that to be a really interesting thing when we started working with the U.S. Statistics Division and the SEEA, as you bring together geographers, ecologists, then economists, and then the statisticians as well, and try to speak the same language. And I don't think we've got it sorted yet, but I think the real key is being able to quantify uncertainty at the various steps along the accounting process. So starting with your, the extent and the condition, the provision services, and work your way through. And at least from our experience working on some pilot accounts, you can develop accounts for some services that by the time you get to the end of the process, the uncertainty has reached a point when you really can't make a real strong call one way or another to value, when you get to the valuation stage. So in that way, even with uncertainty, non-monetary valuation or relative valuation of services can still be very useful from a priority setting standpoint for understanding the context of ecosystems and ecosystem services. But yeah, getting to that final stage when it's included in the supply use table, the government can run with, at least until we can sort out some of the uncertainty issues, it may be a very small subset of ecosystem services that can really make it to that level.
Yeah, maybe I can also continue to discuss a little bit. So I'm Petteri Vervaara from Finnish Environment Institute. We have this statistical role that we are also like a national statistical office. We and our sister institute, Natural Research Institute of Finland, we are providing the data for our governmental statistical office, which is the statistical office. And I've been involved in this MICE process in the European Union quite a lot. We were doing biophysical synthesis in this Esmeralda project in the European, funded by the European Commission, ended this summer. And it comes to this point that the measuring of these biophysical ecosystem services, especially some regulating services, is quite challenging task definitely, because there are such a universe of different kind of models with different kind of uncertainties. They are used for different purposes, and it's some kind of random process that which is the model which ends up to be used for building the statistics. And I would like to hear your opinions that how, for example, this Earth observations could support in such a process for selecting the best models, or make some kind of at least best available data input for the models, because there are, for example, for this European exercise only, there were like tens of different models which we found out from the review made by the scientific literature. And when you go closer to the decision maker, people working in a ministry, they don't have any idea of this model work behind the values and the one number, as you mentioned, or the uncertainty. So maybe this kind of question for your comments also.
Yes, I think that speaks really well to the work stream 3 that we kind of outlined at the beginning. And a big challenge with a lot of the ecosystem service models that we use is ecological modelers, they'll happily tell you all about all the different nuances of everything. But as we say, you need to stick with something or figure out the model that works. And then ultimately the decisions you make on that are going to build in the assumptions and the limitations of that model. So one area that we see as an area for further research is really a lot of these models are parameterized. You have a single like a lookup table. In a lot of cases, even more advanced models are still using lookup tables for assigning service provision or the use of ecosystem services. So bring in more observations so that you can get at dynamic changes and increase the temporal resolution and the geographic specificity of models is an area that we can see that there's a lot of opportunity for embedding for observation data. But again, as you say, it's still in many ways still very much under development and pretty hotly debated.
It's about progress. We are debating with these carbon models, especially because this forestry sector is very important nationally, and they have their own forestry and agriculture ministry. And then there are climate issues under the Ministry of the Environment, which are maybe using different kind of models, and they have their different system framings. So it's really like that. Which are the best models? All are available.
Yeah.
It's kind of the fascinating thing with accounting, because I think it's pretty awe-inspiring as an assessment. But as you move up the continuum to accounting, where you want to you want to make it as rigorous as possible, I think it's forcing these different communities to try to make some choices. But as you move up that chain from extent to conditions, supply and use, you start getting into that more uncertain territory, I think. And I think again the good news is that these communities that are coming together, these ecosystem, folks who had worked previously in ecosystem characterization all their lives, folks like Roger, combining them with people who have been thinking about ecosystem service valuation and applying monetary values and putting them together, I think has been a really useful byproduct of accounting. So, anything? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, maybe another thing also what relates to this discussion is that I'm also involved in this GeoBond and co-chairing one of the working groups which deals with the essential biodiversity variable implementation in local regional scales. So I'm thinking if there might be some kind of synergies between, you mentioned that GeoBond is very important also. That now GeoBond, they are very much focusing for their own working groups where they are experts of ecosystem structure, ecosystem function, but many of those people have never heard about ecosystem accounting, for example. And if you have a geo initiative which is dealing with ecosystem accounting, it would be really useful to get the best EBVs somehow implemented through this observation for ecosystem accounting to the different audiences. Also in the decision-making process.
I think
That
that's
needs some kind of collaboration between the initiative and the vaccine.
Yeah, you actually articulated our end message. I think one of our motivations for being here and for running this side event considerable overlap. We attended on the first day the variables, the essential variables discussion, and someone made reference to the UNCEA and that whole discussion about whether we want an initiative to really pull all these together. It's fascinating, and certainly we'd love to be part of that conversation and explore where those overlaps where we can learn from each other on all these things. I think we all aspire to the same thing: systematic solutions for systematic problem, right? That's what GEO is all about. And I think, since you and many others are part of GeoBond, let's continue this conversation after this event is over, which is now, I think, right? Is it 3:30?
Otherwise, the coffee.
3:30, yeah.
We did that yesterday.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And thanks to all the speakers.
Thank you, and all the best for the gecko.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, yeah, I feel so bad.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's new motivation. It's a couple of very specific.
Good luck. We'll see you the next time we do one of these things.
Operation Health Index.
We just
Oh, yes, that's right, yeah. Yeah, I think, one of the discussions is whether we can get the new home and things like that. So data. I'm not in the process of doing the analysis. And one of the reasons for the delay on our end is that there's a lot of people. So we're trying to find some time as many folks in our process department. I am here till Thursday.
Last week,
Have an initial chat, but we definitely would.
That would be good. I mean, there's some, kind of broader knowledge. Right, and she does some health insurance as well, and, but yeah, so that'd be good to talk about, so, okay.
Do you know Roger, by the way?
Maybe to come.
I mean, you come, you let me know, and
Yes.
I'll be ready for the next meeting.
Yeah, I've been talking to Emily as well. She definitely
We're all
wants to connect Blue
together
Planet
and
with Feel
so
Free.
I don't know.
So she was gonna invite you and John and me before the
She
planet
works with
would go
someone
out.
that I know.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
they're like
No, it's,
Yeah, there's something like that as well.
Yeah.
They should learn well from that drop the ball.
yeah.
then,
Justina.
Christina.
Nice to meet you.
Trying to get over the CI for a long time.
Myself and Jan,
Yeah.
talk about collaboration between NOAA, NOAA and NOAA Justice.
the president of SEEA is coming to our institute next
It is in part because, I think Emily is also meeting with Sue on the topic she's working on, but because Geo
Then
is
she's
too
the
busy,
one that is going to be.
connecting all
So,
the dots.
next month,
There's
everybody.
separate bits of
Yeah,
NOAA. Talking to you
Or
and
there's
where,
always been like, first
To give
November,
us this,
the people
Stephen
will
is
come in.
treasurer.
Then
Right.
everything will change in government. You
Oh,
will, but
no,
you will
I'll
survive.
stay.
We tried to say it
Because we're
last month.
yes.
Put it
I
off.
have a, I was, nominated by the Senate for 2 years.
Interfering.
So I already there for a year.
Is he out here?
she is, she's in the, I don't know what I thought.
Like with this person.
Yeah, I haven't seen him.
Yeah, that's in that all day, so.
I thought all of the government organizations.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
thank
Should we get some coffee?
If you had,
Let's get some
Coffee
coffee.
sounds great, yeah.
Getting back to the States.
So I am
And
there.
the further, like, when we first become back in Geo,
Almost at the end.
or your Geo Day, Esri, Esri produced holidays,
For
they created the JS Day. And every year, CI has a geography week. The GIS puts on for everyone, and it's got a series of very, like,
Do that. Do that. 'Cause there's some obscure islands out there.
That's what I was
But
figuring.
somebody knows it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Bye-bye.
exactly. So I think that might be a real
Yeah.
treat.
Bye-bye.
Well, it's so good to have you.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Plenty of coffee.
There's
yeah,
coffee.
there's-
Coffee.
yes,
Okay.
there-
Maybe
We're
everyone
done.
left already.
We're done.
Thanks for the report, Mark.
Thank you.
So Mark, I should have called you out as a EO4EA member. I meant to do that.
Okay, well, it's okay. I just, struggling with a poster that was